Hey guys, today I am back with another video. Today I am going to really explain how the pentatonic scale works in a minor environment and a dominant setting. There is a lot of players out there, I'm sure you included, who can play the pentatonic scale. But there's a difference between playing the scale and owning the scale. And very few players who play the scale actually own the scale. And in order for you to own the scale, the pentatonic scale, you have to know pretty much its intended purpose. And very few players know that. So if you already know that, then you can just skip right over this video because I'm just going to tell you things you already know. If you don't know the ins and outs of how its purpose, what the purpose of it is, then stick around. Maybe you'll learn something because this is a learning channel. It's also a very basic channel. As you notice, I don't do tabs and things like that. That's because my wife is so busy doing her normal computer job that she doesn't have time to do all that stuff. And since I'm not a computer guy, because I'm a player and teacher, I don't get savvy with a computer. I'm an artist. I'm not a tech savvy guy. And I'm sure there aren't very many tech savvy guys who are the artists that I am. Because usually we are on the opposite ends of the spectrum of life. Being a tech savvy IT person is the exact 100% opposite and farthest thing from an artist, such as myself. So you can't expect me to be that guy, and I'm certainly not going to be able to do all that tech savvy stuff for you. So you're going to have to learn the hard way, the old school way, doing it the way all other great players did it. We did our own work. And that's what you're going to do if you're here. So then the first thing I would suggest you do is get yourself a pen and a paper and a pad because you're going to need to take some notes. And by the time you're done, you'll be glad you finished watching this because I'm pretty sure that 98% of you need to see this video because although you know how to use the pentatonic scale, you don't know why you're using it, and you won't be able to use it in a controlled manner the way you will when you're done with this video. So I'm offering you that. And I'll keep the video as short as I can because, again, as any of you who know, I'm all about no fluff. So let's get right into what's going on. If I can play something to demonstrate, I will. But this is basically to teach you how to play because I already know all this stuff. And this is very vital information if you really want to be more than just a bedroom player or sounding like a bedroom player. Even if you play on a stage, you can still sound like someone who's not professional. So if you want to be a professional or know what they know and understand at the level that, guys getting, at the big level know it, then this is a good video for you to watch. So let's get right into it. The pentatonic scale is basically used in minor settings. That is the intended purpose of it. Even though we can say there's a C major pentatonic scale, the A minor pentatonic scale is the intended scale that is the minor. The pentatonic scale is built to be built for minor chords. It's not built for major chords. And we have proof of that. So everything I say to you, I'll be able to prove, not just give you opinion. I'll always say I can prove it. I can prove everything I say to be fact, not my opinion. I'll tell you when it's my opinion. Otherwise, it's a fact. So the minor pentatonic scale. We're going to use, I'll refer back to E minor and A minor because they're simpler scales. They're also more common. People use those more often than, say, C sharp minor or B minor or something like that. Or F sharp minor, things like that. Let's keep it simple so we can understand. Then we can convert and move to other keys as we know what we're doing. So let me start with this. If you look at a minor 7 chord, we'll just use A minor 7. Again, pad and paper are necessary. If you don't know this stuff, start writing it down. You can always pause the video to get, write things down. A minor 7 is A, C, E, G. We know that, right? If you don't, you know now. So write it down. A, C, E, G. Now, I don't know where you're going to get I'm just going to tell you the information because I'm not going to go through how to build all the scales. I have videos out there to do all that already. This is just going to give you the facts of how and why to own that scale and the purpose of it and you mastering the purpose of that scale. So I'll tell you the purpose of it and then I'm going to break it down. The purpose of the minor pentatonic scale is to complement one chord. The minor root chord names the key you're playing in. So if you're in the key of A minor and you're using the A minor pentatonic scale, that scale is designed by nature only to complement the one chord A minor and or its counter cousin A minor 7. And I'll explain that to you. But that is the intended purpose of the scale, to complement just that one chord that names that key. That's it. Done. Lesson could technically be over if you know all your notes of all scales, keys, and chords, then you don't need any more explanation. But if you don't have if you don't have every chord, scale, key memorized from all the keys you play in, then you need to finish watching this video. So let's dive deeper a little bit further down. Now, let's take a look at the A minor pentatonic scale. A, C, D, E, G are the 5 notes. We always go in alphabetical order, so there you go. A, C, D, E, G. Let's look at the A minor 7 chord. A, C, E, G. So, as we can now see, 4 out of the 5 notes of the chord are in the scale. There aren't any other scales that do that. There isn't any other scale that has all the notes of the chord in the scale except for one note, because diatonic scales can't do that because there's 7 notes in the scale. And those other notes serve other purposes. But when you look at A minor 7 and you see A, C, E, G, the only note that's not in that chord is the D. Right? So pretty much you're roaming around the pentatonic scale. Anything you hit will complement your A minor 7 chord. Now, you got to know, you're obviously going to be rooting off of the A minor 7 or the A minor chord in your solo when you cut the lick or the solo, whatever you're doing. Lick or whatever. Solo lick, whatever it is, you're focusing on that one chord, A minor 7. So whatever your progression going around is, it's going to be mainly about A minor, because the notes of, so the second half of this is, if a chord's notes are not in the scale, you can't solo around that chord. Well, I shouldn't say you can't, because the law says you can do whatever you want. It's just going to sound like S, because the musical rule is this. If the notes of the chord are not in the scale, then the scale cannot support the chord. Because the bottom line is this: nobody likes mayonnaise in their cereal. Nobody likes salt in their Fruit Loops. And nobody wants to hear notes that aren't in the chord over the chord, because that's just not going to work. If it did, there wouldn't be any purpose for a key. You could play the notes F sharp, C sharp, and B flat right over the A minor chord, and it would all sound great because you wouldn't need a key because everything would fit. But it doesn't all fit. You can't just jam a note over another note. Just like you can't just take some white substance and throw it in your frickin' cereal just because it looks like sugar, because it might not be, right? It might be cocaine. It might be salt. It could be anything. But it's not going to be guaranteed to be what you want. You have to know that that's sugar you're putting in there. And you have to know that the notes you play are in the chord you're playing against. Because if you're playing over A minor, which is A, C, and E, and you're playing F sharp, B flat, C sharp in your solo, it's going to sound like shit. It just is. That's the whole purpose of having a key, so that you play the notes from the chord and they match the scale from the key, so the notes in the scale match the notes in the chords. Now, we need to get a little bit more deeper than that if you want to sound like a professional. You need to know every single note in the scale. So when you play the A minor scale and you go A, C, D, E, G, A, C, D, E, G, A, C, you know every single note by heart where they are. So when you're playing over the A minor chord or the A minor 7, and you know that that's A, C, and E, you can reach for the particular notes you want to complement. Do you want to complement the E, the C? How do you want to put the lick together? Do you want to have an A and a C in there? Like, for example, here's your A and C. Here's the E. So if the chord progression is revolving around 2 or 3 chords in your key, and one of them is A minor, when you hit the A chord, right in the solo, you're going to want to do things that match over that chord. So you need to know every single note on the scale, where each note is, so you can reach for the notes you want when they're over the particular chord. Because if your chord progression is A power chord and then the D power chord and then E, well, the D note, folks, right, is in the A minor pentatonic scale. It's already in there. So hitting the D note would work. It would complement your chord progression overall. Even if you're played over the A chord and in the A power chord there's no D, it doesn't matter. You just use the D as a passing tone when you're over the A. But then you get to the D, and now you're using the D a little bit more often because you're on the D chord. But still understanding that this chord progression is still revolved around the A. So the other chords in the progression, they're just filler chords. You're still focusing around the A chord the entire time you're cutting a lick over this solo. You can go to the D note for a complementary note when you're on this D. If you're on it long enough, you can use the D note a little bit to play off it. But the reality is you're going for the A, C, and the E notes in the scale. Now the G is just a 7th note. It's not really that powerful in the sound of playing over it, but it's in the chord. And that makes it complementary in itself. But you really are focusing on the A and the E, the root and the 5th, for the gold. All right. When you're playing over when you're in A minor pentatonic scale over any A chord, A and E are gold, whether it's the A7, which we'll get to in a little bit, or the A and the E, or the ACE. The A and the E, the root and the 5th, are the kings. So you're always looking to pivot off those two notes. You can rest on E. It's like you got to get back to the A though for the final resolution. So A, C, E, G, A, C, D, E, G, they're pretty much the same thing. When you're in the scale of A minor, the whole scale is lending itself to you. It doesn't matter where you stop. As long as you get back to the A. So you can rest on any other note as long as you get back to the A. And that's the simplicity of the scale. So the secret to the scale is, in owning the scale, which all the pros know, is they know every single note in the scale, what letter it is. They're not just playing through a pattern. They know every note in the pattern where it is. They know every note in the chord that's going around. So when they hear the chords flip through the progression as they're hearing them with their, if you're in a recording or you're live, either way, you know exactly what chord is being played by the other guitar player and the bass player. So when you're cutting your spot in the song, you know what you're matching up against you know when there's an A chord being played, that's A, C, and E, or A and E. You know when it goes around to if it's, say, for example, an E power chord, you now know that the chord is E, G, B, but you still got E and G in your scale, in the pentatonic scale. So you're still going to use the A as your main root note, but now you complement with the E and the other notes that are in this chord. So E, G, B, right? No B in the pentatonic scale, but you got the E and the G. They just complement the A. So this E chord, it's just going to complement this A chord. This D chord will complement this A. This C chord you might throw in complements the A chord, meaning you're still focusing on the A notes over every one of these chords because it just doesn't matter. The scale only supports the A minor 7 chord. A minor or A minor 7. So you can't play off anything else. So even if you were playing the E chord, when you're using the A minor pentatonic scale, this is a filler chord. There is not enough notes. You got the E and the G here, but you don't have the B, and it's not supporting three or four of the notes. So you can't get away with the same things you could get away with if you were rooting off of the A. So no matter what chord you're over in your A minor progression, you're still pulling to the A the whole entire time. And if you look at any solo or fill, it does the same exact thing. So it isn't like I'm making this shit up. So the bottom line is A minor pentatonic works best when you only focus on the A. See, no matter how far away from it you get, you can always just come right back to it. As long as you use the notes in the scale, it'll sound like you meant to do that. So if you go out to it like an F, you can work your way right back to the scale. It's just you work your way right back in. And that is the secret to the minor pentatonic scale in the minor setting. You have to understand that the 4 notes of the minor 7 chord are in the scale, and no other chord in that key has that going on. So you can't use any other chord to sound as good as you would the root chord. Now let's answer this question. Why are we using a minor pentatonic scale over a major chord progression in blues, such as A7, C, let's say it's A7, D7, E7, your typical 1, 4, 5. Or if you were in E minor or E major, you're doing an E7, A7, B7 in the key of E major, but you're still using the E minor pentatonic scale. A lot of players will ask, why can't I just use the E major pentatonic scale? Or if I'm in A minor and I'm using, if I'm in the key of A major playing A7, D7, E7, why can't I just use F sharp minor pentatonic scale? Because that's the key I'm from. I get that all the time. And so even some of you guys have left a couple of comments. I got a couple of emails about it. I just haven't, I have not put anything out in a while. I've been really busy with life. When I can, I do. And I had a couple of years there where I could, but life is just busy now and I'm busy doing other things. So I do want to try to put a video out when I can and make them important videos like this one, discussing the ins and outs of the theories of scales and things that you don't read about, but these are facts you need to know. Matching up notes from scales and chords is parallel and is paramount, I should say. It's required if you're going to sound good. You have to understand that relationship between the notes you're playing and what are being played. It's the same exact stuff, just you're spinning the notes one at a time. Somebody else is playing them in a group, but at the same time, you're playing all the same notes, and you have to understand that. And then you get creative with those same notes, knowing where to pull the root to, depending on what you're doing. And so in this particular situation, the root is always going to be the root note of the name of the key. So if it's A minor, you're always going to pull to the A in the pentatonic scale. Same thing for every other pentatonic key, and it's not possible. Let's get back to the diatonic thing now, the dominant thing. So we have A7, D7, and E7. And so the reason, I'm just going to say it, and then I'll give you and prove it to you. The reason why that's the minor scale works over these major key blues progressions is because the seventh notes of those chords is in the minor pentatonic scale. When you look at the dominant note of those chords, we have to first go back to what dominant really even is all about. Dominant 7 simply is a minor 7 note on a major chord. And the reason that is because we call it dominant 7 because that minor 7th note is not from the key that the chord's from. It's a separate 7th note. It's not the major 7 note. It's a flatted note. It's a minor 7 from another key. So that note dominates the sound of that chord because it doesn't really belong. It's almost like saying you got 4 white fingers on a glove and now you got an orange finger in there. It sticks out really, really hard. And it's hard not to look at the orange finger when there's 4 white ones staring right at you. So it's hard to not hear the dominant 7 note when it's not really it's not in the key, but it's in the song. You're just kind of going, what is that thing that isn't normally supposed to be there? So the 7 note now dominates the sound of this chord because it's a minor 7 in a major setting. And that's where you get the word, that's where they come up with the dominant 7 name. Now, referring to the scales, if you look at all those 3 dominant 7 notes in A7, A, C sharp, E, G, right? We just got done talking about the A minor pentatonic scale. You're writing things down. You got a piece of paper. You're writing down A, C, D, E, G. You're writing down the notes for A7, D7, E7. You got A, C sharp, E, and G, right? Then you got D, F sharp, A, and C. And then you got E, G sharp, B, and D. So we have major chords, but all the 7s are not major 7s. Those 7s are not a half step from their roots. They're a whole step from the roots, and that makes it a minor 7. When the 7 is a whole step from the root, it's a minor 7. And then farther away from the root the 7 sits, the darker it is. That's why a diminished 7 sits 3 half steps from the root and is darker than a minor 7, whereas a major 7 is a half step from the root, and that's why it sounds so sweet, because it's closer to the root note, and the closer it is, the sweeter it sounds. The farther away the 7 gets from the root, the darker it sounds. So now we know that. Let's focus. We've got a minor 7, 2 frets away from the root, versus the major 7. That's why it has that sticks out like a sore thumb type of thing going on. So now that we understand that, we need a scale that works. We need a scale that fits the dominant sound because that's the sound you hear. You don't really hear the major chord in the song progression. In that chord progression of A7, D7, E7, you are not hearing the major key part. You're not hearing the major sound. Oh, the happy sound of A, C, and E. How lovely. No, you're not hearing that. This ugly ass 7th note is hogging the whole sound. He's dominating the sound. So now you have no choice but to go to a scale that's going to complement the dominant 7 notes because they're the king sound. They are the king of the sound. And if you're not going to complement the sound that you were hearing the most, then you're completely wasting your time and you're missing the mark. And you're not going to get it. So what you have to understand is the 7th note is what you need. Now, 3 of these chords, there's 3 chords. So 3 7s. Now, a pentatonic scale only has 5 notes, which means we obviously now know that 3 of the notes of the pentatonic scale need to be in these chords. So where are we going to find the pentatonic scale that I'm in the key of A major. I got A7, D7, E7, right? I got 7th notes of G, C, and D. G, C, D. A, C, D, E, G. So we got an A minor pentatonic scale that has the A note, same as the A major chord. We got the D note for the D chord, the E note for the E chord, and we got A, C. So then you look at the D chord, and the 7th note is the C, Right, you're writing all this down because you can see how everything fits. Then you look at the E chord, you got the E note for the root of the chord E, and you got the 7, which is D. So let's take a look. If we wrote A, C, D, E, G, all 5 letters of the pentatonic scale are in the 3 chords. The A's there as the root. The C is there as the 7 of the D chord. The D is there as the 7 of the E chord. The E is the root of the E chord. The D is, right, and the E, and then the G. And what's the G? Where's the G fit in? It's the 7 of the A chord, right? Every single note of the A minor pentatonic scale complements the A7, D7, E7 chord progression. And so that is why we're using. And if you didn't know that exact reasons why, those reasons why, well, then this video will help you, because when you're out there cutting your solos, I'm going to say this, we are thinking of scales and keys and math in our heads while we're cutting licks. Now, not when you're recording the lick or it's already written, but when you're coming up with the licks, you are thinking, hey, okay, so this is the chord progression going around. These are the notes in the chords. This scale has these notes. This scale works great over these. When I'm over this, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to try this. And math goes on in your head. And if you don't think math goes on in your head, or math does not go on in your head, then you are nowhere near reaching your personal best. Think about that for a minute. How many of you guys are sitting there saying, holy shit, I don't count. I don't think of notes when I'm playing. I just rip through the pattern. Well, yeah, you're just a pattern player. That's what they call you. That's the reason why they call you that. Because you don't know every single spot in the scale and what the value of that spot is. I know this is A. I know this is A. I know this is A. I know this is a C. So when I play and I go A, C, I know where every note is I want to hit. So I don't hit anything on accident, and neither does anybody who knows where all these notes are and knows all the chords and notes in their head. You're bouncing what's going on. You're putting together the math in your head and bringing it out on the guitar. That can't be done if you don't know all the notes in your head. You don't understand what I just explained to you about the 7th note being the dominant note of the sound. So now you need a scale that complements the dominant sound, which is the 7th notes of these chords. You're forgetting about the notes in the chord. You need the dominant 7 sound. It just, luckily, it works that the root notes of A and E are also in the scale, because you're really going after the G, that C, and that D, because they're the dominant 7. And it just so happens because you're in the A key, yes, you need an A, and the A is there. So this just works to be perfect. And that's so any key you do this in, it works the same. If you're in E minor, same thing. You go E7, right? And you what's the 145? E what? You guys know it? EAB, right? EAB. So E7, A7, B7. One of the most common chord progressions out there. Go do this yourself. Write it out. Write out the 7th chords, write out the minor 7 scale, look at the dominant 7 notes for E7, A7, B7, write out E minor 7, right? Write out all the 3 minor chords, A minor 7, B minor 7. Notice how the 7s are there, EAB is there. Just notice how the minor pentatonic scale owns that first chord of the key. The E minor 7 is in 4 notes of that scale. B minor 7 is 4 notes of the B minor scale. You can't go wrong. So the 5th note that's not there works as a passing tone in every single spot. Every time you hit it, it works like it's in the chords themselves. And so if you didn't know that, well, now you know it. And now you can go and memorize every single box pattern, the notes inside them, so you know where every single note is of every box pattern. If you don't know the notes of the fretboard yet, you probably will know the entire board by the time you get to the point where you can play every single pentatonic box up and down and know every single note in the box by heart. And when you can think of those notes while playing it as fast as you can play, then you've mastered your guitar. Now, if you can get to the point where you can play as fast as you can play and you get up to some serious speeds, maybe by developing those speed skills and then using the pentatonic scales, you would truly be at your personal best. Because if you took a guy like John Petrucci, he can, any of those professionals, Randy Rhoads, or anybody who used these scales, any of these newer guys, Jason Richardson, all of them, they all can do the same things with the scales. Whatever speeds they're able to play at, they can run through the scales at those same speeds because they know the notes. So your homework is to see the relationship between the chords and the scales, and then be able to know every single note of your scale pattern so you can pick which notes in the scale fit the things you're playing against in your chord progression. Because the notes in your head in the chords work together with what's in your hands. And guys, that is the secret to playing and owning the pentatonic scale. That is what you need to know to truly own that scale. And if you didn't know that, I promise you, your playing will improve when when you're able to think these things through while you're playing. You're thinking, here's the notes of this chord, here's coming up on the scale. I'm going to use this note for I can bend this, sound like this, make it up, bend it up to this or that. And you really open up your playing, because if you weren't doing this before, it can bring you to an entirely new place. And who knows how good you are, you could be so much better. And who knows what your goals are. But if your goals are, or you're in a band and you want to be better and you want to get attention, then your music needs to call that attention out. And the only way you're going to do that is to own the music theory as if you've invented it yourself. Guys, I hope this has helped you understand completely and thoroughly all about the pentatonic scales, things you may not have known. So stick around and I'll try to put out more videos. Stick around. Thanks a lot.